All right. Okay, so we are continuing on Samach Tes Amud Aleph. Um, again, the backdrop of our discussion has to do with ISKA, and ISKA we know is a partnership, typically between someone who puts in money and someone who puts in effort. And so the Gemara gives us all kinds of circumstances on how we deal with that. And one of the important pratim that we learned is that in order for it not to appear like ribis, not ribis deraisa, but ribis deravanon, so we have to pay some kind of a wage. It's a machlokes what that is, very, very minimal or a full wage, but a wage nevertheless, something that will appear to be payment for the effort that's done, because after all, and we're going to see this today, that there's really a question about, the person who's doing the work, that's what he's there for, to do the work. So we're going to ask the kasha why really we should pay him, because, that's part of what he does. But we see that in an iska, and remember that in an iska, in order for an iska to happen, then there has to be an advance agreement of what the value of the iska is. You can't just say happenstance. There has to be an agreement that there'll be a splitting of the profits and everything like that. So there has to be much more detail than just sort of a general statement. Will be partners, and we're going to see that in some situations where that's not said, where the iska is not valued in advance, what the repercussions are, because there are repercussions if you don't in advance sort of set out the terms. So the terms are important, and you can't just say, "Oh, we're going to become partners. I'll put in some money, you'll do the work, and everything will be fine." No, that doesn't work that way. We'll get more definition on that. But again, the key thing for our purpose now discussion is that there has to be some modicum of wage of some kind of, to show that it's not ribis, even if it's just minimal. All right, so that's the backdrop of where we're going to start now. We're going to start with Rabbi Lezer Mahagronia Zavan Behema. I guess that's about, I don't know, 10 lines or so, maybe a little more, 15 lines from the top. Um, so this
It's
circumstance
it's
is,
in most Gemaras. It's opposite the Tosfos that has the starts with the Amri.
oh, Domri, okay, fine, good. Yeah, yeah, very good. Just more than 15 to about 25 lines. So here's a circumstance where Rabbi Lazar Hagroina was himself a businessman, and so he went ahead and he bought an animal. Okay, so he was going to go into business. He bought an animal. And he came to his Arise, his sharecropper, who was an employee of his, typically in other things that he did. Rabbi Elazar had land and other things, so he was a known commodity. And he said to the sharecropper, "You know what? I'm going to Here's the behemoth, and you're going to go ahead and do the work, and we'll split the profits." In other words, so the animal itself was designated as the chayfetz, and the agreement was that each one would take, in other words, again, by doing an assessment, what does that mean? That means that the sharecropper was committed that if it didn't go well, he would be mechoyev. In other words, it's not just a one-way street. He says in the Iska, when you do that, you have to say, "I'll take half the profit and half the loss." I mean, we expect a profit, but if it does have some kind of a loss, then you have to assume that loss as well. Okay, so that was the agreement, which is somewhat typical. Now, what happened? Mefatim lay. So the sharecropper, he fed the animal and he made it nice and fat. So it was increased in value because it was fattened by him. V'yovle reisha ba'agre. So then they went ahead and they sold it. And Rabbi Elazar Grona gave him V'yovle reisha ba'agre, and he gave him the head of the animal as a schar. That was his wage, that's the way you go about doing it. In other words, for the work that he did, um, he gave him a wage, and the wage was the head. V'yov palga rachve. But aside from that, he also gave him half of the profit because that was the agreement. We'll share the profit or the loss. It was profitable. He gave him the profit, um, but he also gave him the head of the animal, which is again we've seen this before that this is kind of the right way to do it. Omle de mise. So then the sharecropper came home to his wife, and he told her what had happened, and so she responded, if you, let's say you had money or the ability to become a partner with Rabbi Lazar Magroina, in other words, you're just the sharecropper, the worker. But if you had been a partner with him, then she said, Zorle Nami Alisa, then he would have given you not just the head, but the tail. So, sort of an expression that if you'd been a partner, you would have gotten more than just if you were a worker. Okay? So, right, fine. So he went ahead and he did that. He followed her advice, and he next time that the husband bought an animal, he says, "I'm going to contribute money to the animal." He had enough money to be a partner, and he became a partner. So listen, Oswald Zaman Bahadeh. Um, so they bought an animal, and now he did it. He worked. He fattened it. Palgale Alisa. So they sold it. Um, so the Palkele Malisa, Rabbi Lozer went ahead and he gave him his chelik for the wage, but he also divided, when he did the divide, he divided the entire animal, including the tail. Remember that the wife said if you'd become a partner, then he would have given you the tail too. You would have gotten more. So here he's a partner. And Rabbi Elazar says, okay, we're going to split it 50-50 all the way up. Amalei to niflige l'reisha. And then Rabbi Elazar said, you know what? Now we're going to split the head. The head was the wage before, but he's now telling him, now we're going to split the whole animal down the middle. The tail, the head, everything else. So Amalei, the sharecropper said to him, Hashta v'yakara namilo. Before, as a worker, I got more than I'm getting now. In other words, you're taking because I'm a partner, I'm getting less than if because before I was a partner, I got the profits and I got the head of the animal. And now you want to take that away from me because you're going to split the head and the tail, everything 50-50. And I don't get a wage. Remember, the purpose of the wage was because when you in a ISKA, part of the investment by the fellow with the money is a loan. So when it's a loan, you have to pay him because it shouldn't appear like ribbis. Here, there's no loan. He didn't borrow any money. They each put in the same amount, $100. And when it came back to split it 50-50. So that $100 that the sharecropper is putting in is giving him less of a return than if he would have been just a worker where he would have gotten 50% of the profit, the same
But
50% he's getting.
he's getting half the tail. Even though he's getting only half the head,
No,
he's
no, but
getting half
before,
the tail. When
right,
it's a full,
go ahead.
who says he comes out with less money?
Because before he got a
So-
50% of the profits plus the head, which
Right.
was, but now he's not even getting the head. He's only getting 50% of the head. He's
But
not
he's
giving
get,
him the head.
but
He's
he's
splitting
also,
everything down the middle. So
but
he gets 50% of the head instead of the whole head.
but
So he's worse.
he also gets 50% of the tail, which is
Of,
what the wife's complaint was.
right, but the l'chayra, the head is worth more than the tail. Okay, you're right. So he's getting part of the tail as well. But the point is, I should be getting much more because I'm an investor, not just a worker. That's what his taina was is because he's not giving him a wage. There's no point in giving him a wage. There's no loan.
Rabbi,
So
I'm confused about the case. Can you help me here?
yeah,
So, in the initial case, is he just a worker?
yes,
So, are we saying that the his partner supplied the animal?
right,
All he did was fatten the animal up,
right.
okay? and he got a wage which was the head of the
Animal.
and then what I don't understand, and if I understood you correctly, they split the rest of the animal in the wage example. So he's
Yes,
not a partner, he's just a worker.
right.
So the when we say split the rest of the animal, the guy who provided the animal doesn't recover his cost, right? It's just I'm giving the animal,
They,
you're working.
they, they don't recover costs because they're splitting costs. Let's say cost
Well,
the
wait a
feed
minute.
cost
There's a
$100.
cost of providing the animal.
Right, the food, whatever.
No, no,
Yeah,
no.
the
I'm
animal
talking
feed.
about the animal
No,
itself.
no. The animal itself is the investment. In other words, that's his chelik of the deal. That
All right. So
purely,
when we say profit, it's every dollar. It's revenue, not the amount
The
over the cost of what they provided.
the animal got fattened up. It was worth a lot more than when they
I
started.
understand that, but it was worth
right.
something beforehand. So I just want to get this because we're worried about the worker. The guy gives the animal, who gives the animal,
No, but
doesn't
Michael,
get any.
let me hold on, Michael. The animal they assessed at $100. When they sold the animal, that first $100 goes back to Rebbe
Okay,
Lazar
that's what
because
I wanted to
yeah,
understand.
I
Okay,
figured that's what you were asking,
okay,
right?
okay, that's what I wanted to understand. So in
Right.
the case of a worker, he's only get paid his wage, and the agreement is you're going to get a wage of the head, and then we're going to split everything else 50-50.
Let's say it's now worth 200, so Rebbe Lazar gets his animal back, and they have $100 to split between them, right?
Okay, so he gets his animal back, and then they split it. So
Correct.
okay, so that's fine, and he's just a worker, so he's not a partner. But
Right.
the donor of the animal said, I'm getting the animal back, but I'm giving you part of the animal. We're splitting the proceeds 50-50, and I get my animal back. So if he's just a worker, he doesn't have he's giving him more than just his wage, correct?
He's giving his wage plus half the profits.
Okay, but the guy, does he have an interest, or he's just a worker?
Just a worker.
Okay, so he's giving him more than he's entitled to, because as a worker, he's only entitled to his wage because he's
No, no,
not an
no.
equal partner.
No, no, no. When they in the beginning of the Iska, the Rebbe Lazar who had the animal set out the terms. The terms were as follows: I'm putting this animal it's worth $100. I'm putting it into a partnership. You're
Okay,
going to
so it
work
is
with
a
the fatten it.
partnership. He's not just the worker. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Right. So therefore, if the animal decreased in price, let's say it didn't do well, then that worker would be responsible for
Okay,
half of the
okay,
losses.
that's what I thought. It was a different case. That's what I
No,
was trying to
no.
understand.
Right,
So then
right.
in the second case, he's getting he's a full partner.
He's a full partner, right,
Right. And so he's donating the work.
right. On top of his
The other
investment, correct.
guy, now the Chachamim were very worried about him getting something for his work, even though he's an equal partner, and you can't donate work.
Yeah,
So
but keep in mind, Michael, once he's an equal partner because he invested money, there's no longer a loan, so there's no more the chashash ribis. Because ribis wouldn't exist here if he's a full partner and not
okay,
just
so I want to
working.
understand what a full partner means. So it means the animal is contributed by the first guy.
No, no. The animal's worth $100. He contributes the animal, and the other fellow puts $50 to the animal. In other words,
Okay,
he's
that's the
actually
difference.
putting
Okay,
up
I didn't
money.
understand the
Yeah,
term.
yeah. He's
Okay,
actually
okay,
putting up money. Right,
okay. So they
right.
are,
So,
in both cases, they are partners.
except
The
a different type of partner.
different
Right,
type of
right.
partners. But when you said worker, I thought you meant just a worker and not a partner.
No, no. The reason why I said worker is to distinguish it from when he is a full partner and he's not considered a worker because he's considered a shutaf, a real partner. So the question here was, if he made X number of dollars as a worker, shouldn't he make more when he's a real partner?
I understand that, but that's the risk of it. So, Rabbi, just one follow-up question. If he contributed $1 in case one, would he need a wage?
So that's the question the Gemara had asked previously. And so if he contributed, well, you say if he contributed $1, no,
that's his partnership, and I'm going to work, but I'm also giving $1, or even $10, and I'm going to work.
No,
Am I a partner, equal partner?
No, you're not a full partner, and that's the problem. Is because if you're putting in some money, then are you what chelik of shutvis do you really have, so that you still need to get something back from the other guy to show that you're being compensated for your work. Giving the dollar doesn't take away the problem of the wage. In other words, yes, you could look at him a little bit differently because he's not just a worker; he's also a shutuf to the tune of $1 or $5, whatever it is, and that's fine. But that's not material enough to our case to take it away from the chashash ribis, because ribis has got to go the other way, not from the worker to the money fellow, but from the money to the worker. That's where the ribis question comes in. It doesn't come in because he gave him $1. That doesn't change the circumstance.
So what's the crossover,
right,
Rabbi, when he becomes not a worker and a partner?
But when he's fully invested. I mean,
well, fully invested means an equal 50-50.
Right. Look. He can say, "I can only give you 40% of the acquisition. You take 60." We're partners to a 60-40 relationship, but there's still no loan. It's still just a partnership. So it doesn't have to necessarily be 50-50. It has to be whatever the proportion of his investment, but it's not. There's no ribis question anymore because he's a quote unquote a partner.
Rabbi, I'm a little confused. I thought we started this scenario that the investor says, I have the money, I'll buy an animal. And you will do all the work. You'll feed it, you'll graze it and all of that. You'll fatten it up. You don't have to put in anything. So
But you're liable for loss if there's loss.
Right.
That's key. That's key.
Meanwhile, he didn't put in a penny yet. The worker or the other partner who does all the labor, he doesn't produce any money into the deal, and that's what's written down. You do the labor, the work, and so on, and then after I get my $100 back when we sell the animal, assuming you fattened it up, then the rest of the profit of the corporation, we will split 50-50. But the other partner never puts money in.
Correct.
But now the story sounds to me like he puts in some money, and I'm
the second case he puts in some money.
So this is a new case where he's not only a partner from the original arrangement, but he's also contributing some of the money for the $100 that the animal cost.
Yeah, remember that what happened
doesn't change just because he put in $10.
Yeah, but that's the point. That when he made this deal originally, and he brought home whatever he brought home, so his wife said to him, "Okay, now you're just getting 50% of the profit and a wage. Become a full partner with him." She's theorizing. Become a full partner with him, and you'll be in a better position than you were if you were just a worker.
But you don't get away.
But she's implying that you'll have
that he'll be better off.
You'll have to get $50 into the partnership to be a partner.
You have
of
to put
the $100 animal.
But she's anticipating that the return will be better. and it turns out the return is not better. And then the worker said, "Why am I not in better shape having become a partner than when I was just a worker?" You said the reality is when he was just a worker, the Rabbi Tuvia Grauman was very generous. He said, "We're going to split this profit 50-50. I'm not going to take three
But he's
quarters for you."
also splitting the loss at the beginning.
Plus splitting the loss, right? He took a risk because he didn't put in money, but he could lose money if the animal did not produce. So the animal produced, it became fatter, there was a profit, and he got 50% of the profit, not for any money invested, just for his work. And then the Gemara says, yeah, but in order to take it away from Ribbis, he's got to get a little bit more. So he gave him the head. Now, in the second scenario, he says, I'm going to be a chacham. I'm not going to become just a worker. I'm going to contribute money. Remember, now he's at risk for money. He's putting $50 into the animal, and he becomes a partner. So l'chayra, you would think that by risking his $50, he should be better off than he was by not risking his $50.
No, you wouldn't, because he's foregoing wages. By being an equal partner, he's foregoing wages.
But he didn't anticipate that.
Yeah, but that's part of the essence of this.
Right, but the fellow did not anticipate that he would lose the head.
Okay, I understand that, but what troubles me, as it has before, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that even if he pays a nominal wage,
right,
it's still a wage, and so
correct.
Therefore,
according to Rabbi Yehuda, yeah.
So right, like Rabbi Yehuda. So what I don't understand, if they could set up the ISKA to provide any wage at all, then you circumvent this completely. You don't have to worry about wages. So and now we're talking about, well, if he's only contributing, if he's a 10% partner and he's working some while the other guy may be working too, he's got to get paid something. It's either you're an investor or you're not an investor.
But when you're not an investor, you're not entitled to a wage. You're not entitled to a wage if you're an actual investor, not just a worker.
And that's why I asked the question. If he gave 10% to 90, he invested 10% in the partnership to 90.
Correct. So he's no longer a worker.
So he doesn't have to be compensated, even though his percentage is less.
Correct.
Okay. So so the point is, if you're an investor of any kind, you don't get a wage.
Then you don't need to get a wage in order to avoid ribbis. The answer is yes.
Right. So you could even put in $1. And
if he puts in a dollar,
a compensatory percentage ownership, and then you're working to try to get the profit, but you don't have to get a wage.
That's right. Okay. That's right. That's
so
correct.
I didn't understand that before, because when we said about difference in partnership, so isn't this the workaround? Either way, either you say, I'm going to give him a small wage and we split in profits, or he contributes $1 toward the partnership, and then I don't have to worry about ribbis.
That's right. So the question here became that he asked, I invested in this deal and I'm making less than I would have made if I was just a worker.
Well, but that's part of being an investor. That's a risk you take. You're foregoing your guaranteed wage.
Right. So that's the question. The Gemara says, Omale, so that the worker said, Hashta b'mikara namilo. You're going to make me worse than I was before. Before, when I was a worker, I got a wage, right? And now that I'm a partner, I don't get a wage. Everything's 50-50. So in his mind, he was taking a step back by becoming a partner as opposed to a worker. So that was his question. Exactly right. I mean, in the interim, this is an interim question. How can it be that I'm going to make less money by being a partner? His wife said, if you're going to become a partner, you'll get more. And it turns out that by becoming a partner, he's getting less. So that's what the Gemara is saying. That's what the Gemara is saying. So uh, so how do we understand this? So Rabbi Lezer. So Rabbi Lezer, yes. So you're right. This is the question. Rabbi Lezer says, "Ada idna zuzidi dehava." In other words, Rabbi Lezer is saying, in the first scenario, I was the only one putting up money, right? You didn't have money or whatever. I put up the money, and you didn't put up any money, but you were mechuyev for half of the loss if there was a loss, right? So therefore, by definition, since you agreed to half the loss, then we had to consider this to be a loan for which ribis was an issue, right? So again, this Rabbi Lezer explaining why there was a misconception here. So because in the beginning you took only half and were responsible for half the loss, therefore it was a loan and I had to pay there. So he says, Ilo hava purta. If I didn't give you a little bit more than half, mechzik ribis, that it would seem like ribis. Okay, that's the scenario in case number one. Because Rabbi Lezer is explaining to this worker who doesn't understand why he's not in a better condition than when he invests rather than when he doesn't. So he's explaining to him that there are steps to be taken when you're just a worker as a workaround for ribis. Hashta shutfa anan. But now there's no loan. Remember, there's no loan anymore. We're partners, whether it's equal or not totally equal. So therefore, I don't owe you anything. Micah Umrit. Then what tanya do you have that you should be compensated more? In other words, you're right. By becoming a partner, you change the scenario, and therefore there's certain things that you're not entitled to. Again. So the point is that in the first case, we're going to say that this sharecropper is a worker and doesn't have money. He doesn't have money. He's a worker. So Rabbi Lezer is giving him an opportunity to make money, even though he has not that he doesn't have a risk. He has a risk of loss, but he has no ability to put money in, so that he's making him a partner without putting any money in. That's a good deal. I don't have any money, but I'll do the work, and I'll get 50% of the profit because I don't have money to invest. $50, 50,000, it doesn't matter what the amount is. But so therefore he says to him, that's why for that scenario, I had to compensate you something more so that it shouldn't look like ribis. But if you're a partner, if you have the ability to put in money, then you and I are equal. Then you shouldn't be getting more than me because we're just equal partners and there's no chashash ribis, right? So he's saying, my comrade, what can you possibly say that would make me be mechuyev to you? So in a sense, Michael, becoming a partner is taking a step back from just being a worker. But the reality is that in the first case, he couldn't have become a partner because he didn't have the money. So, in other words, you have to sort of look at the scenario, what's in front of us when he doesn't have the money and just a worker, and the money guy was generous, and he could have said, I'm going to give you only 20% of the profit. He didn't have to say, we'll split it 50-50. That's what he told him. He told him, I'll give you 50% of the profits. That's a tremendous deal. But he could have said 30% or 20%, and that still would have been a valid deal by just taking 20%. Then he would have been mechuyev for 20% of the loss. But he's giving him a generous deal, which obviously when he's investing, he can't do better. He can't do better than what he did in the first case, because in the first case he was very, very generous by giving him 50%. But when he puts in money, whether it's $1 or 10 or 50% of the money, then he has a vested interest to the amount of the money that he invested, and therefore you're now in a different scenario. He's trying to explain to him why, yes, he may have been better off as a worker than as a partner, because as a worker he didn't have the money to put in, and Rabbi Elazar was generous by giving him a chelik of the profits and potential losses. So he's explaining to him why he's not entitled to more than than he was the first time. And the first time he got the head, and here he's not getting the head. So
Rabbi,
that's yeah.
What would happen if the deal was to the worker in the first case? You're entitled to profits, but you're not hit with any losses. Would there be a thought that there might be ribis going the other way to the person who was doing the work? So it says you don't have to worry about any losses, the partner who contributes to property. But if there's a profit, we'll split it. So
but by definition,
does that change the dynamic as far as ribis is concerned? Either way.
Absolutely, because then it's no longer the classic iska. What produces the ribis here is because of the setup that half the profit, half the loss, so that it's a loan for which he could become liable. But if he says to him, "You're not on the hook for anything. You'll get half the profits or 20% of the profits, whatever, and no loss," then it's no longer by definition an iska. The whole definition of iska is where he puts in the money and he says we're profits, we're partners in the profit and the loss. Then it becomes a loan. It doesn't become a loan anymore if he's by definition in an iska. It doesn't become a loan if he's not mechuyev in half the losses. Then there's no longer.
Does he still have to pay him a wage in that scenario?
No. Then he doesn't have to pay him a wage because there's no chashash ribis anymore. There's no chashash ribis because by definition it's not an iska. The whole problem with an iska is that you're doing something outside of the actual deal that looks like you're doing more than what was agreed upon. What was agreed upon was 50% of the profit, 50% of the loss. That was it. That was the iska. But now, in order to get there, he's got to do work.
But the person's devoting his time, and he's not getting paid for it unless there's a profit. So he's got to get some kind of wage according to this.
Michael, but it wasn't a loan. There was never a loan for us to say that he needs to get a wage, and without a wage, in other words.
But he worked for the combustion. I mean, I can't understand. This is not
getting a loan
before
because his benefit was that he wasn't taking a loss. His benefit in your scenario is that he was not liable for a loss. If he's liable for a loss and he's working, then you got to give him compensation.
I got it. Okay.
Right. So he's not liable for the loss. So then the whole situation changes. You either make a gain or you walk away.
So you can structure a deal where you contribute all the assets. You tell your partner you can work and you have no risk of loss. If there's a gain, you'll share it. If there's not, it's on me, and that is not. You're not gaining from him not working for nothing. You're not gaining anything, so therefore it's not ribis.
Correct. That's correct. That's a correct statement, because at that point, yeah, I mean, look at it this way. His benefit, he got a benefit. He doesn't share in the loss. That's already a benefit. If in your mind you want to think, oh, he should get a wage or something, he is getting something. He's not mechuyev in the loss. That's a big thing. He's not taking any risk anymore.
When the rabbis were so worried about, here's a guy who invests his time and he's not getting paid for it, where you're contributing assets. But if you protect him on the other side and say, you're not going to lose anything for your time, that's okay. It's not ribis. You have not gained anything from his time if he's not subject to a loss.
Correct. That's how we would look at it.
Okay, I didn't understand that before.
Yeah. So in this scenario, Rabbi Elazar is explaining to the sharecropper, you know what? The reason why you're not getting why you're not why the reason why you're not getting the head of the animal is because there's no loan involved, and therefore there isn't a chashash ribis. If the whole chashash ribis is when there's a loan, and then this would be a benny on top of the loan. A benny on top of the loan is considered ribis. But when there's no loan, because we're partners, you put money in, then in effect, you're not entitled to more. His wife thought, oh, he's going to put in money and he's going to get he'll be in a better situation. She didn't understand, right? She didn't understand that it changes the whole dynamic of the deal, that by becoming a partner, there's no longer a loan, so there's no longer a ribis issue. Therefore, he doesn't have to give him the head of the animal. So he was better off. He could say to her, I was better off just being a worker and not putting the money in. And at the end of the day, I'm not any worse off, and I get the head of an animal. So that's what he's explaining to him. But then the Gemara says, so he has no taina. So my ka'amrit. So he said, what are you going to say? That you got half the profits and that's it. So he said, purta. Nevertheless, even though I put money in and we're 50-50, then forget about ribis. There's no ribis here. We established that. But still, I should get something for my work. I should get a salary, a wage. In other words, he's not tining ribis because there's no ribis anymore. But he's still tining. We each put in money, and then I worked. We each put in money, and then I worked. Shouldn't I get something for my work? My work is worth something, not in the context of ribis, but in the context of just fairness, that we each invested. This is the second case. We each invested money, and on top of my investment of money, I also worked. So I should get something for my work. But not b'toras ribis. So he's asking him that question to Rabbi Elazar, is it fair? So he answers him, Stama Risa Lamore Ara Kemishabed Nafshi. That he says, no, you're not entitled. Why? Because in a circumstance where, let's say, Rabbi Elazar is bringing the animal and you're just investing, then it's understood. This is what he's saying. He's saying that it's understood that since I brought the animal and you're just going to become a partner, that there's something you should do, even though you invested the money, of course, but there's something you should do on your end. What is that? The labor of taking care of the animal. So he's saying, la'asuye raya. So that, what are you going to do? It's not going to be heavy duty work. You're going to take the animals and you're going to bring them out into the field. And you'll make sure that they eat. I mean, we're not asking a huge amount of work from him. We're just saying that he should be compensated. He should do something, and that something is what everybody. In other words, it's common knowledge that when a person enters into this type of deal where he's a full partner, then he'll contribute something a little bit more. Again, we're not talking about ribis anymore. Now we're talking about fairness. Should he get some kind of compensation for his work? And Elazar says, no, there's no compensation because in this kind of arrangement.
But he's giving him his time.
He's giving some of his time. Right. But Elazar is saying that that's common practice, that when people enter into deal, one person brings the animal to the table, i.e., he's getting money for it, but he still brings the animal to the table, that the other guy should do something, even though he's investing half the money. He's investing half the money, but he should do something over and above. Therefore, it's not a fairness issue anymore. Again, not ribis, but fairness. So that's how Rabbi Elazar answered him. But what do we see from this? So at the end of the day, he would have been better off just being a sharecropper and just being the worker, because Rabbi Elazar gave him a generous deal. He gave him a generous deal and said, you're going to share the profits and the losses, and I'll give you a wage, right? So
without putting any money in.
without putting any money
That's the
in,
whole
right?
thing.
But that's a big thing because putting money in, not everybody has the ability to do that. It's kind of a windfall in a way for the worker, the sharecropper. And he said, "Wow, look at this! This guy is just giving me opportunity for 50% of the profits for no money and a wage on top of that. Oh, that's a wonderful deal,
A
and
great
that turns out to be a better deal than just being a partner."
on one
So,
animal.
be careful what you, you know what, be careful what you wish for, because sometimes you're going to want something different and it's going to backfire, as in this particular case, because he didn't even get the head of the animal. That was split 50-50 between the worker and Velosa Agranio.
Well,
It's a little bit of a different situation.
had he been able to, if the investor says, "Look, I'm giving you two animals," it's the same amount of time. You still have to take them out to graze and this and that with a feed, and you're going to get back a lot more. You'll get double the profit as if I only put in one animal into this deal.
You mean he put
Instead of putting one animal into the deal, the
yeah.
investor says, "Look, I have a great deal on two cows or whatever," and
Yeah.
you're still going to be the partner, but then you're going to get the profit of two cows
Right.
for
But
the same amount of time and work, because the work is not much more
well,
between.
that's the point. If the work is that much more, so is he getting a fair wage for taking care of two? If he is, then there's no ribbis. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that that there's a little bit more work for two than there is for one, and he pays him a wage that would be the equivalent of a wage for one animal, not two. Let's just say that was the scenario. Then you'd ask a question: is there ribbis involved because he's working harder and only getting less compensation? If, as you say, and that's true because the Gemara even said before that the Gemara last week it told us in a situation that where the shepherd had his own animal, and he
Right,
would take his own animal out to graze, and he would take the animal from the partnership out to graze. So it's not a big deal because his animal's already, he has to shepherd his own animal. So
right.
then, fine, the other animal's there too. It's not a big tircha. Therefore, it's a different scenario. But you're right. If it's two animals and there isn't a lot more tircha than there was before, but the point was that he would then have to share in the loss of two animals. Let's say the animals did not do
Okay,
well.
so that's his risk.
That's his
Anytime he
risk.
goes into this deal, he's got a risk. But
And that's what
he
the
may not
Iska is
lose.
about. The
He
Iska,
may lose on
yeah,
one animal, but not on both. But the point is
you
that
you don't know, and right,
his
that's
time,
what the whole Iska.
his
Yeah,
he's giving in time because he has to do this instead of another job somewhere. So the time may
correct.
be the same amount for two animals than
Right,
one animal, and the work is a little bit different, maybe, but it's still he's losing his time, and that's where he ends
right.
up with a double benefit
Double
for the
benefit. So
same amount of time.
right, and the only question there will be is the wage sufficient for two animals as it was for one? If it is, you're 100% right. If
Why
it
not?
isn't, then we would still have a ribis issue if he's giving him more time and getting not compensated for that time. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that wouldn't matter because he can give him a dried fig and it wouldn't matter. But according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says you got to get a fair wage, and he's getting fair wage for one, not for two, then we might have a problem because you're going to say, wait a minute, for two he should have gotten he should have gotten more than what he got. So that ribis issue might still be there if he wasn't compensated
It's
fairly
not,
one to one.
but it's
Wait,
not.
Rabbi.
It's
Yeah,
not linear, because the example of when he has his own sheep together with the flock, it doesn't cost
yeah,
him
they're
anything.
right.
So it's not. It's a non-linear situation when you
They're
go
not
from
linear,
one to
right?
But
two.
Rabbi, I want to go back to what we said before just to make sure I got it right. If there's no risk of loss and the guy is putting in his time, no money, and they split profits, he does it doesn't it's not ribis in any case because he has no risk and there's a potential for benefit. So he could work with 100 animals, have no risk of loss. He would make whatever the percentage was that they agreed to on those animals. He put in nothing as an investment, and he would not need to be compensated a wage for his time because he had all the potential for gain. Is that
correct?
Yes.
Correct.
So
yeah.
that's how.
But Michael, the reason for that is because that scenario takes it out of the whole parsha of Iska. It's no longer the classic Iska,
I
which
don't
is
understand that because there's the
profit loss. The
potential that
profit
they
loss.
make nothing, and the guy has devoted his time. So he is not compensated any wage. He does have the potential to benefit. Whether it's one animal or 100 animals, he gets a percentage of the profits, and that which is what many partnerships consist of. Somebody contributes their time and somebody else contributes the assets. I'm not saying it's so black and white, but there are partnerships that are that way. And as long as the investor protects him against loss, it is not ribis completely because he has no chance of losing anything.
Correct.
So that's how you structure. I mean, that makes it easier to structure deals.
It does make it easier. It does make it easier, absolutely. But you must have a very generous finance person who's going to say you get only profit and no loss, and I'm doing all the money. So, why would he do that?
I'm going to take 90% of the profits. You'll get 10, and you'll put in your time or whatever they agreed to as
and that's fine. Percentage. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
And so that means you can contribute your time without money, where the other person contributes money, and it can be perceived, not perceived. It is a partnership in that sense, and you don't have to treat it as a pure wage.
Because he's not giving him a loan. He's not making him the only reason why we have a ISKA problem is because it's a loan. When you're not lending him anything anymore, you're just saying you just get profits and nothing else. There's no quote loan involved, therefore no wages required.
But
that's the real underlying. What?
That should be a good.
That's the underlying reason. That's the underlying reason.
But to do an ISKA, you don't have to have a loss side of the deal, do you?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. If you're making an ISKA, there has to be a profit and loss circumstance.
Okay.
And then it's considered a loan, and therefore you need to protect from ribis. Once you're taking it out of the parsha, the real definition of ISKA, meaning you can only get upside, no downside, then so his work is for the upside. His work is for the upside. That's not ribis. That's not ribis. If his work is for the upside, straight for the upside, without a downside, then his contribution is the work. But when he has a chance to lose money and he works, then we consider it to be as if he's lending him the money because he has a chance of losing.
Yeah.
Then we have a ribis issue. So you have to understand that that fine line of when it becomes ribis is when the worker has something to lose. If he has something to lose, then it's considered as if the money guy lent him the money. And for a loan,
it didn't work out.
You have to be shash ribis, right? But when there's no loan, then there's no shash ribis. So Michael, it doesn't matter whether he promised him 50% or 10%, whatever the percent he profit. That's there's no loan attached to it anymore. So therefore, there can be no ribis. Now, the Gemara is telling us here, but he has a taina that he worked. Remember, when he was a 50% owner, the Gemara says, Rabbi Love is explaining to him why in the one case, he gets the head, and the other case he doesn't. And then he says, but wait a minute, but I did some work. I worked and you didn't work. So the answer is that there's an expectation in this circumstance that you will work. In other words, Omri Inshi, people will say, Stam Arisa Lamore Ara Kamishabit Nafshi, that when a person works for the owner, that he'll do some work, right? So, what's the work? I mean, again, I'm not a shepherd, so I can't say, but he'll just have to take it out to graze in a place where they can eat. And it's not as if he is working with the animals, running with the animals. I mean, this is work. I won't take it away. But what's he doing? He's taking the animals and he has to walk with them until he finds the right parcel of ground. And from there, they'll just eat, and then he brings them back. Is that work? Yeah, of course it's work.
He has
But
to always chase after the ones that run away.
I have to chase after the one. Exactly. So there's always will be some work involved,
Sure.
but he's saying Omri Inchi, this is the common standard that people will understand that that's the price you pay for being a partner, is that you got to do something. Right? Now the Gemara is going to go further and tell us some of these, other issues involved with that. But something you got to do. I mean, I'm giving you a break. I'm letting you become a partner here. I mean, partnership has its benefits. So, but under this particular circumstance, where the finance guy was so generous that he was willing to give him 50% of the profits, albeit 50% of the losses, then we have to in some way compensate him. But because it's considered a loan. But if it's merely just we're straight partners, You put in money, I put in money. You take a chance on profits, I take a chance on profits. The same with losses. Then we're equal in shava v'shava, and then you don't need to get paid because again the key is there's no loan anymore. You put in money. The difference between the first case and the second, Michael, is in the first case he's not putting in money, therefore he's being lent. There's a loan involved. He's being lent the quote unquote the money for the deal, which he doesn't have to put in. In the second case, there's no longer a loan because he's putting in money. Once he puts in money, then the whole scenario changes because it's not the typical iska. Therefore, there isn't in other words, the fellow Rabbi Lazar who had the animal is giving the other fellow the opportunity to put in the money, and therefore there's no loan. And that's the key issue here. Is there a loan? Once there is a loan in a case, you have to worry about ribis. But when there's shutfim and there's no loan, even if the shutfis is not equal, so 70-30, 80-20, whatever it is.
He's basically doing a chesed for this other person. I mean, that's another
right.
way to look at it. He's trying to help out
in a way, yes.
His neighbor.
He's trying to help him out. Right.
Yeah.
Now, again, between the lines in that particular Gemara, the interpretation is he's a previous worker. This fellow was a worker of his on the fields, and then he went ahead and bought an animal and said, "I'm going to include you in my deal."
Yeah.
Because he had a pre-existing relationship with him. He was a sharecropper. He was a Aruse. He was a sharecropper who worked for him just on the field, period.
Right.
Without profit. Just, he worked and got a wage. Now he wants to bring him into a deal, and he says, but the deal is you got to take a risk. The risk is that if there's a loss, you will share in the loss.
Even though you didn't put in any money.
You didn't put in any money. Different than before when you were just a sharecropper working my field. There was no risks of any type, right? You worked my field, you got a wage. Here, I'm giving you something, but I'm also expecting something from you. That's an iska, and that iska is part investment and part loan, and therefore, for the part of the loan, we have to protect us. He has to protect himself against ribis. Therefore, he has to give him a wage. It's a little bit of a complicated issue because he's doing him a benefit, but with that benefit, there's a potential loss. That's where the key comes in. I'll do you a chesed. I'll let you become a 50% partner, but you got to be a 50% partner up and down. And someone may say, I don't want to take that risk. it's one thing to be a 50% partner up, but I don't want to be a 50% partner down if there's losses here. So that's the chiddush here. That's the whole key.
Rabbi, I think it's only a potential loan. If there's a loss, then you can call it a loan. But if it's not, if there's
No, but
not
it's a loan in
loss,
play.
yeah.
No, you're at the end of the day, if he makes money, you wouldn't say it's a loan. But going in, you don't know if you're going to make a profit or loss. So by not knowing, we automatically have to say that it's a loan because we don't know if he's going to make a profit. Sure, if we knew for certain he'd make a profit, you might be right. There wouldn't even be a loan here. It would be just a one-sided thing. But the whole point of an iska, and that's really what we're discussing here, is that there's an agreement. There's potential. Again, and every iska is different, but since there's potential profit, potential loss, so the Gemara is saying that when you have those potentials, you have to be very, very careful on how you set it forth. Okay, so all right, let's go a little bit further. Okay, so now we understand it. So Tana Rabbanan, so the Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis learned. Hasam behema l'chavero. If someone values the animal, and again, the key is that he put a value on it. He put a value on the behema, and then he gives it to his chaver, to his friend, to go ahead and work. Different question. Ad mosai chayev l'tapel bo. What is the end of this deal? How long does he have to work in order to get his schar? In other words, is it open-ended? He'll work forever or not? So it's a different question because he's now working for the other guy. And the question is how long he has to work. How long does he have to work? So Sumchus says that it depends. Ba'asonos, if you're dealing with bigger animals like donkeys and others, Shmona Asa Chodesh. He has to commit 18 months. In other words, they probably figured at the time that's the fair, and we'll see why. That's the fair amount of time for someone to make a deal and benefit from it. In other words, you can't say it's forever, right? We have in our law something called the law against perpetuity, that you can't have a contract that has no ending date. That's not a valid contract. That's not considered a valid contract. So about but godros, but small animals like sheep and goats, then chovdalus chodesh. It's 24 months. So what the Gemara is telling us is that this isn't an open-ended deal. That when you give him, after everything we've said and done, and he's given him this deal, and he gives the profit and the loss and everything else, there is a time element to this deal. Now, the imboa lachlok besoch zmano. Let's say the worker, after 10 months, and he's tending this donkey, and he's exhausted, and he says, "I want out. I tended it for 10 months. I don't want to work anymore." So if he comes and he says that he wants to terminate within the that period of time, he says, "Let's split the profits anyway." Then machaver ma'akavlo. Then the owner of the animal can be ma'akiv him and say, "No, you got to continue working. That I'm not going to allow you." It's almost akin to the situation that we had earlier, where a person loaned money and they were in a society where you couldn't prepay interest. And the guy said, "But I'm coming to prepay interest." The guy says, "I'm not allowing you to prepay. The whole deal is that you would pay interest for a period of time." So in other words, when there's an agreement on time, you can't break the agreement because you're tired or you whatever the reason. You can't do it. You have to follow through. Aval ein doma tipula shel shana zo. Now, but there's a but here, and there'll be a question here. However, the work for the first year is not the same as the work for the second year, right? Let's say you're tending to a donkey, and for the first year, the donkey, okay, it's a smaller. Well, again, it's a donkey. It's no longer a baby. We'll see why. But you're tending to the donkey for the first year, and um, now you're fine. Now for the second year, the tipula shel shana acheres, but the work for the second year, meaning it's 18 months. So let's say for 9 months and 9 months, he means the second half of the deal. He comes to him after a year. Now he has another 8 months to go. He says, but the work required for that second 8 months, um, there's more. It takes a harder. It's more work. So it's more work for the second half than for the first half. So so he's tying to him, and he's saying um, that the work is not the same. The expectation was that he would give him the full 18 months, knowing that over the course of time, there would be more work. In other words, it's not going to be one equal amount of work for the entire 18 months. He knew that going in. So he wants to take advantage, the worker wants to take advantage and said, let's split the profits now because I don't want to work harder in the next 8 months.
But there's no profit now unless he sells the animal.
But so right. So he wants to force the issue and take whatever profits he can. But the guy who has the donkey says,
the investor says, no way.
No way. I want my full 18 months. It's not fully grown, and I'm going to have my best return in 18 months, not in 10 months or 12 months. So he's allowed to time it to him and say, no, you can't do it, even though there's more. As you go further into the deal, there's more work.
But there was an original ISKA signed.
There was an original agreement, right? There was an original agreement. So basically, you can't, just like you can't break on the prepaid interest, you can't break the agreement and say, I've had enough.
But the ISKA probably said that we will not sell the animal until it is fully grown.
That's correct.
A minimum of 24 months or something.
Right. So
otherwise, it wasn't a good ISKA.
Exactly right. Right. Exactly right. So therefore, he has to go the full mile, and if he walks away, he gets nothing because he didn't fulfill his interest. So okay. So the final
somebody else. Well, first of all, the owner he has to find another worker to take care of.
Find another worker, right? And he may make a different deal with that guy because you're already 10 months or 12 months
halfway through.
Halfway through, exactly. So the Gemara asks the kasha. So just to finish up, my aval. If you want to understand what this is about, why do you say aval ein a daima? You should just say ein a daima. The word aval is kind of like but. What but is there here? You're describing the detail of the deal. It's not a but like an exclusion. So the Frek the Gemara, what does it mean in this price when he says aval, the aval ein a daima, right? Normally, if it wasn't a big deal, then maybe the owner would say, you know what, you're tired, I'm going to let you go, I'll give you some of the profits. But here, like you said, Jay, the whole deal originally was that they understood that they needed 18 months for this donkey or 24 months for the goats. They needed that in order to get the best return. So why is there an aval? The aval is like there's an exclusion. There's no exclusion. He's explaining ein a daima tipula shel shana zu tipula shel shana acheres. So why does the Gemara say aval, which changes the understanding?
Isn't the aval in the brisa?
Yes, the brisa says aval. So
aval, saying, right? Okay,
my aval. What is the aval? Right? That's the reason why he can't break it up, because there's more work in the second half, and part of the deal is that he'll work the entire 18 months, even though there's more work in the latter part of the deal, right? So therefore, as in other fashion that we know, Ella, Lefisha Ein a daima tipula shel shana zu. So he said the brisa was incorrect. And you take away the aval, because the aval would change the structure of the brisa, and because you put a but in there. So therefore, take away the aval. and say, you know why he can't break the deal? Because there's a difference of the work at the beginning and at the end, and they made a deal to have it all the way through. Therefore, you can't break the deal. Again, this is not atypical, because when the Gemara, when the Brisa says Aval, I don't know why they said Aval. So he's saying, okay, we made a mistake. It's not Aval. It should just be the Fisha Ein. Anyway, it's just a little aside. But again, what we see from here is that the how detailed, again, we talked about that in the parsha, how detailed the Mishkan was. You have to spell it out chapter and verse. You have to put every lashon in. You have to understand. You can't leave gaps and say, oh, we're not going to discuss this and this will happen when it happens. No, you have to set out. The entire deal has to be set out in the beginning. What this guy is doing, what this guy is doing. What's the profit? Is there loss? Is there not? Because everything changes the deal. What's that?
It's an important lesson that you trust the other person, but you have to put it down in writing.
You have to put it down.
No matter how, it could be your brother-in-law or something.
No, you got to put it down in writing, because there will be misunderstanding of what was said and what was meant, and therefore you put it down exactly in writing. And you see the difference. Again, the biggest difference was in the case where he was a worker or when he was a partner. Yeah, when you're a partner and you put in money, then if you put in 50% of the money, you're 50% of the partner. In the first case, and I think, Michael, this was the issue, is that he gave him a 50%. He could have said, I'm not giving you 50%, I'm giving you 30%. It still would have been a windfall for the guy, because he was making something without putting money in. And of course, his loss would also be consigned to 30%. If he was a 30% profit, he would have a 30% loss. So in that case, the ISKA is a loan, and therefore you have to pay. But once a person puts money in, whether it's 50%, 40, 60, 30, it doesn't matter, then he's already a shutuf, then everything gets split 50-50. Why should he get anything more than 50-50? Now, in that case, it's not a classic ISKA anymore, because there's no loan. Therefore, there's no chash ribis. So the Gemara said, but he should get something for his work. The Gemara says, no, that the standard in the industry was that when you're invited into a deal and you put some money in and the other guy is sort of making the deal and letting you join, that you have to do a little bit something. It's not considered a loan, but you got to do something. What's that something? You gotta find the pasture. You got to find participate, right? You get points for participation. Anyway, so that's again the Gemara, until we finish the next daf, is just giving you different approaches so we can look at an iska from every side and understand. Because all of a sudden we're talking about when's the end of the iska. We never discussed that. Well, again, and we have further to discuss, and that's not just over, but. Again, the ISKA has a timeline. And again, we learned that, as I said, we have a law. You can't have an unending contract. When we do contracts in business, it can't be in perpetuity. There has to be a defined end date. That end date can be amended later, but you've got to put into the contract an end date so that it doesn't look like anyone's taking advantage by saying you're going to work forever. So there has to be that seichel. So that's what the Gemara says here too, is that there has to be an end date. So he says, fine, 18 months for a donkey, 24 for a goat, and zehu.
Okay.
All right.
Yashikoah.
Baruch Hashem.
Thank you.